The train's whistle screamed into the dusk, a piercing cry that echoed the terror clawing at Lila's heart as she clutched her tattered carpetbag, her knuckles white against the faded fabric. She stood alone on the platform of a dusty Montana town, the wind biting at her thin shawl, her eyes wide with the weight of a decision that felt like a noose tightening around her future. She was 22, a mail-order bride who had never known a man's touch, fleeing a life of poverty and shame in Boston for a stranger's promise scrawled in a letter that now felt like a lie. The man she was to marry, Caleb Wright, was nowhere to be seen, and the station was emptying fast, leaving her with nothing but the fading light and the dread that she'd made a terrible mistake. Her heart pounded as she scanned the horizon, half expecting to be abandoned, her dreams of a new beginning crumbling into the prairie dust. This was her last chance, her only escape from a past that haunted her, orphaned at 10, passed between cruel relatives, and finally cast out when she refused to marry a lecherous widower twice her age. The letter from Caleb had been her lifeline, his words plain but kind, promising a home, a family, and a little girl who needed a mother. But now, standing in the cold, with no one to claim her, Lila felt the weight of her naivety, her virginity a secret she guarded fiercely, a symbol of the control she'd fought to keep over her own body. What if Caleb was not the man he claimed to be? What if this was a trap, a cruel jest played on a desperate girl? The platform creaked under her boots as she took a trembling step forward, her breath catching as a small figure emerged from the shadows, a child, no more than 6, with tangled brown hair and eyes too big for her face, staring up at Lila with a question that would change everything. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected love, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts for more stories that touch the soul. Your support keeps these tales alive. Lila's breath hitched as the little girl stepped closer, her worn dress patched at the knees, her hands clutching a rag doll so threadbare it barely held together. The child's eyes, a deep hazel, held a mixture of curiosity and longing that pierced Lila's defenses, making her forget, for a moment, the fear that had gripped her since she'd boarded the train 3 days ago. The platform was nearly deserted now, the other passengers vanishing into the twilight, leaving Lila and the girl in a bubble of silence broken only by the distant howl of the wind. Lila knelt, her skirts pooling in the dust, and met the girl's gaze. She didn't know if this was Caleb's daughter, the one mentioned in the letter, but something in the child's expression, a raw, unspoken need, tugged at Lila's heart, stirring memories of her own lonely childhood, nights spent crying for a mother who would never return. She wanted to speak, to ask the girl's name, but her throat was tight with fear and exhaustion, her body aching from the long journey and the weight of her doubts. Caleb's letter had described a modest ranch, a life of hard work but honest love, and a daughter, Ellie, who had lost her mother to fever 2 years prior. Lila had clung to those words, imagining a family where she could belong, where she could finally be more than a burden. But the absence of Caleb at the station gnawed at her, feeding her fears that she'd been lured here under false pretenses, that she was walking into a life as bleak as the one she'd left behind. The girl tilted her head, her small hand reaching out to touch Lila's sleeve, a tentative gesture that felt like a plea. Lila's heart stuttered, and she forced a smile, her voice barely a whisper as she asked if the girl was Ellie. The child nodded, her lips trembling as if she, too, carried a weight too heavy for her small frame. The town of Willow Creek stretched out beyond the station, a scattering of wooden buildings bathed in the golden glow of lanterns flickering to life. Lila's eyes darted around, searching for Caleb, her mind racing with possibilities. He was delayed, he was hurt, or worse, he'd changed his mind. The letter had been brief, practical, not the romantic prose of a lovesick suitor but the measured words of a man offering a partnership. He described himself as 30, a widower with a small ranch, not wealthy but steady, seeking a wife to share his life and care for his daughter. Lila had read those words 100 times, tracing the ink with her fingers, willing herself to believe in the promise of a home. But now, with only Ellie standing before her, she felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the entire town could see her inexperience, her fear of intimacy, her terror of failing as a wife and mother. She'd never known a man's love, never wanted it after watching her aunt's marriage crumble under fists and drunken rages. The thought of Caleb expecting her to be a wife in every sense made her stomach churn, and she wondered if she could ever trust a stranger enough to let him close. Ellie's hand tightened on her sleeve, pulling Lila back to the moment, and she saw the girl's eyes flicker toward a man approaching from the distance, his silhouette tall and broad against the setting sun. Lila's pulse quickened, her body tensing as she prepared to meet the man who held her future in his hands. Caleb Wright was not what Lila had imagined. He was older than she'd pictured, his face weathered by sun and grief, his dark hair streaked with early gray. His eyes, the same hazel as Ellie's, were kind but guarded, carrying a heaviness that spoke of loss and responsibility. He apologized gruffly for his lateness, explaining a broken wagon wheel had delayed him, his voice low and steady, lacking warmth but not unkind. Lila stood, brushing the dust from her skirts, her heart pounding as she tried to read him, to gauge if he was a man she could trust. He didn't leer or linger on her figure, which eased her slightly, but his distance unnerved her, as if he, too, was wary of this arrangement. He took her bag, his calloused hands brushing hers briefly, and she flinched, the contact sending a jolt of fear through her. He didn't seem to notice, turning to Ellie with a softness that surprised Lila, scooping the girl into his arms with an ease that spoke of deep love. As they walked to the wagon, Ellie clinging to her father's side, Lila followed, feeling like an intruder in their world. The ride to the ranch was silent, the vast prairie stretching endlessly around them, the stars emerging like pinpricks of hope in the darkening sky. Lila's mind churned with questions she didn't dare ask. Would Caleb expect her to share his bed? Would he be patient with her fears? Could she be the mother Ellie needed when she barely knew how to care for herself? The ranch was modest, a weathered house with a sagging porch, surrounded by fields and a small barn. Inside, it was sparse but clean, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and fresh bread. Lila's stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning, but she was too nervous to accept the stew Caleb offered, her hands trembling as she sat at the table. Ellie watched her, her eyes never leaving Lila's face, and Lila felt the weight of the girl's expectations, her own inadequacy rising like bile. She wasn't prepared for this, not for a child's need, not for a man's quiet scrutiny, not for the isolation of this vast, empty land. That night, in a small room with a narrow bed, Lila lay awake, listening to the creak of the house and the distant howl of coyotes, her mind replaying her past, her mother's death, her aunt's cruelty, the men who'd seen her as prey. She'd come here to escape, to build something new, but the fear of failure clung to her, heavy as the quilt on her bed. She wondered if she could ever be enough for Ellie, for Caleb, for herself. Days turned into weeks, and Lila's fears didn't fade, but they began to shift. Caleb was patient, never pressing her for more than she could give, his focus on the ranch and Ellie leaving little room for intimacy. He worked from dawn to dusk, his hands rough from labor, his silences filled with unspoken grief for his late wife. Lila learned to cook simple meals, her hands clumsy but determined, and she found solace in the routine, in the act of creating something warm for Ellie to eat. The girl followed her everywhere, a shadow with wide eyes, asking questions about Boston, about Lila's life, her voice a balm to Lila's loneliness. But the question that lingered, unasked, was the one that haunted Lila most: could she be a mother? She tried, braiding Ellie's hair, mending her dresses, telling stories of her own childhood, but the fear of failing the girl never left her. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ellie climbed into Lila's lap, her small body warm and trusting, and whispered, "Can you be mama?" The words broke something in Lila, a dam of fear and longing, and she held the girl close, tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't answer, not yet, but the question rooted itself in her heart, a seed of hope amidst her doubts. Caleb watched the moment unfold, his expression unreadable, but Lila sensed a shift in him, a softening she hadn't seen before. Over time, he began to share more, stories of his wife, his dreams for the ranch, his fears for Ellie. Lila listened, her guard lowering, and she found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering love for his daughter. She began to see him not as a stranger but as a man carrying his own burdens, a man who might understand her fears if she could find the courage to share them. The prairie, once so vast and isolating, became a place of small victories, Ellie's laughter as they picked wildflowers, Caleb's rare smile when Lila mastered a new recipe, the warmth of the house as winter closed in. But the past wasn't done with Lila. A letter arrived from Boston, from the aunt who'd cast her out, demanding she return to marry the man she'd fled. The words shook Lila, reviving old fears, threatening the fragile life she was building. She hid the letter, but Caleb found it, his eyes darkening with concern, not anger. For the first time, Lila told him everything, her childhood, her fears, her reasons for coming to Montana. He listened, his hand resting near hers, not touching but close, a silent promise of safety. The turning point came one stormy night, the wind rattling the windows. Ellie curled against Lila as thunder roared. The girl was terrified, her small body trembling, and Lila held her, singing softly, the way her own mother once had. Caleb watched from the doorway, his eyes soft with something new, trust, perhaps, or the beginnings of love. In that moment, Lila felt the weight of her fears lift, replaced by a fierce determination to be the mother Ellie needed, the partner Caleb deserved. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and that was enough. The next morning, she burned the letter from Boston, the flames consuming her past as Caleb stood beside her, his presence steady and sure. They weren't in love, not yet, but they were building something real, a family forged not from passion but from shared struggles and quiet moments of connection. As spring bloomed across the prairie, Lila found herself changed. She was no longer the terrified girl on the platform, but a woman who had faced her fears and chosen to stay. Ellie called her mama now, the word no longer a question but a truth, and Caleb's touches, once so frightening, became gentle, tentative, a bridge they were both learning to cross. The ranch thrived, the fields green with promise, and Lila felt, for the first time, that she belonged. She wasn't perfect, but she was enough, and that was a miracle she hadn't dared to dream of. The prairie, once a symbol of her isolation, became her home, its vastness a canvas for a life she was painting with courage and love. If this story of Lila, Ellie, and Caleb touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of second chances and the beauty of chosen family, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts. Your support means the world to us and helps us share more stories that inspire and uplift. Before we end, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below sharing what moment in Lila's journey moved you most or how this story resonated with your own life. Thank you for being part of our Gentle Hearts community.